Is there persecution of Christians in Ukraine? There is, but unless you've done a little research on your own, it may not be what you think it is. It has been breathlessly reported that Christianity has been banned in Ukraine. The church is under attack in Ukraine. President Zelensky has shut down freedom of religion in Ukraine. And all this is to call into question, why are we supporting a tyrannical dictator no better than Vladimir Putin? The evidence of this alleged crackdown on the Christian faith in Ukraine comes from indignant reporting about SBU forces, the Ukrainian security forces, raiding the Kievo-Pecherska Lavra monastery. This monastery is around 1,000 years old and is a beautiful example of Orthodox architecture. However, a little context, I think, will put this in perspective. So let's start with the leadership of the Russian Orthodox Church. The Patriarch of the Russian Orthodox Church, that is to say the head of the Russian Orthodox Church, is Kirill. Kirill names himself after Saint Cyril, the Thessalonian missionary who, along with his brother Methodius, brought the gospel to the Slavic peoples and created the Cyrillic alphabet so that the Slavs would be able to read the gospel in their own language. Unfortunately, this Kirill bears no resemblance to the man after whom he is named. Kirill is a former KGB agent, a very, very close friend of Vladimir Putin, and someone who has openly and consistently praised this brutal invasion of Ukraine. But there's more. Mikhail Agyeshin is a Russian Orthodox priest. He is a former soldier and is a very outspoken supporter of this invasion of Ukraine. He published this flyer to be circulated among Russian soldiers, and when translated it reads thusly: Russian Orthodox Church, Moscow Patriarchate, Bryansk Metropolitanate, you are a Russian warrior. Your duty is to defend the fatherland from Ukrainian nationalists. Your task is to wipe the Ukrainian nation off the face of the earth. Your enemy is an ideology causing sinful damage to the human soul. The Department for Relations with the Military and the Police of the Bryansk Eparchy, Priest Mikhail Agyeshin. Putin will use any institution to undermine and compromise an enemy's will to resist. So given the affinity for Putin that we see in the likes of Kirill and Agyeshin, their support for this war, and especially Kirill's KGB background, it shouldn't be a surprise that even the church would be used as a means for setting up spy and sabotage networks. Now, anyone who has a border with Russia knows this, but those of us who live far away and are isolated from these events don't understand the context of what's going on here. But the Ukrainians do. And because of the threat to their nation's security, they rightly sent troops in to look for saboteurs and spies that could be housed even in an ancient monastery of the Russian Orthodox Church. However, I am happy to say that there are principled Christians within the Russian Orthodox Church. Shortly after the invasion, Father Ioann Bourdin delivered a sermon entitled "Thou Shalt Not Kill." And in that sermon he said, "Brothers and sisters, in the early morning of 24 February, Russian troops attacked Ukraine. There is shelling of Kiev, Odessa, Kharkov, Mariupol, and other Ukrainian cities. Russian soldiers are killing their brothers and sisters in Christ. We Christians do not dare to stand aside when a brother kills a brother, a Christian kills a Christian. Let us not repeat the crimes of those who hailed Hitler's actions on 1 September 1939. We cannot shamefacedly close our eyes and call black white, evil good, say that Abel was probably wrong in provoking his older brother. The blood of the inhabitants of Ukraine will remain on the hands of not only the rulers of the Russian Federation and the soldiers who carry out this order. Their blood is on the hands of each of us who approved this war or who simply remain silent. This man was fined 1 month wages for speaking out against the war. And since then, more laws have been enacted to crack down on dissent and freedom of speech in Russia, especially regarding protesting the war. And there are others. Father Ioan Kumyorov has called for protests against the war with Ukraine. Father Nikander Pinchuk has likened the invading Russian army to the horde of the Antichrist. Both of these men have been arrested and stood trial for their statements and have been fined. But are Christians persecuted in Ukraine? Absolutely yes, most notably in the parts occupied by Russia. On September 11, 2022, a worship service at Grace Church in Melitopol in the Zaporizhia Oblast was interrupted by Russian soldiers. We have a screenshot from a webcast of the worship service in which Russian soldiers showed up. They shut down the service, they took the names of those who were in attendance, and the pastor, Mikhail Britsyn, was ordered to leave the city within 48 hours. Leonid Ponomaryov is the pastor of Kurchatov Evangelical Church in Mariupol, which is in the Donetsk Oblast in Ukraine. Now, he was approached by Russian authorities who wanted to use his church building as a polling station for the sham referendum where Ukrainians were going to be forced to vote in favor of separation from Ukraine and union with Russia. And Leonid refused to have anything to do with such a sham of an election like that. So he was arrested, he was detained briefly and then released again. However, on October 6, 2022, at night, he and his wife Tatiana were visited again by Russian authorities. And as they were being arrested, their neighbors recalled hearing their groans and their cries as they were being handled by Russian police and pushed into a van and taken away. I am happy to say that at least Leonid and Tatiana were released again 2 weeks later. In addition to the persecution of Ukrainian Christians by Russian authorities in Ukraine, there has been extensive damage to religious facilities all over the country because of the massive amounts of artillery barrages, air attacks, drone strikes, cruise missile strikes, and so forth, so much so that at least 270 religious buildings have suffered pretty extensive damage. And these are not just churches, but also mosques and synagogues that have been damaged or destroyed in the deliberate targeting of civilian infrastructure. Now, these events and more are recorded in this report by the Institute for Religious Freedom. This is a downloadable PDF, and I'll leave you the link in the description below. This report also documents interviews with individuals of various religions who have been apprehended, beaten, and tortured into confession by the Russian authorities. So if you're really interested in the real story of persecution in Ukraine, that would be a good place to start. Since the invasion, I had opportunity to meet a young Ukrainian woman whose father is a pastor of a Protestant church in a major Ukrainian city. That's all I'm going to say. I asked if she was in any way persecuted, and the response I got was, no! Like, how could you ask something so silly? I briefly discussed the issue of the raid on the monastery in Kiev, and she said, well, when Ukrainian security forces left, that monastery was still standing. That's the difference.